They said they envision him to be an Alvin Kamara type back, that they're going to use him like that. And if that's the case, one, he's my favorite fantasy running back to draft this year.
We're back. Thank you for joining us, Occupy family. We're thrilled to kick off this season's edition of the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast. Just in time for training camp. Every team has reported. So much excitement awaits. My name is Waleed. With me is my good friend, co-host, and reigning DraftKings $1 million winner of Super Bowl 53 single game slate, Brian Jester. What's going on?
It's a hell of an intro, bro. What's going on, man? It's been a while.
You can't tell I'm excited?
Yeah, just a little bit. Just a little.
Well, let's cut to the chase here, man. I know our audience has been waiting for some football content, and this episode is going to be the first of a two-part series in which we're going to dive into every NFL team's backfield, previewing what to expect and keying in on what we'll be monitoring heading into the season.
Yep, and whether you've been following the offseason NFL draft and OTAs closely, or you're on the other end of that spectrum, we're going to make sure you leave these podcasts knowing the backfield landscape of the entire league.
So let's start with the NFC this episode. We'll run through each division, each team. Up first, the NFC East.
Yeah, and here we have two backfields we don't really need to spend too much time on, right? Between the Giants and the Cowboys, we know damn well who the bell cows are in those backfields. The two guys that led the league in carries and rushing yards and both made a tremendous impact in the passing game, Zeke and Saquon.
Right. I don't think there's too much to discuss here outside of Zeke's holdout, which all signs point to him reporting eventually and getting his contract dispute settled. Both Zeke and Saquon poised for another high-volume, high-producing campaign. Barkley's ADP makes him the consensus number one pick. Zeke's going number 2 in non-PPR leagues, number 3 in PPR. Barring any injury, there just really isn't much to dive into.
Yeah, but the same can't be said for those other two teams in the NFC East, huh?
Yeah, it's definitely messier in Philly and Washington. Let's start with the Eagles. They traded for Bears workhorse Jordan Howard in March. They moved up in April's draft to select Miles Sanders in the second round. They just re-signed Darren Sproles a few days ago. They still have Corey Clement, not to mention Josh Adams, who actually led the team in carries last year. We know how Doug Peterson loves to get everyone involved in the backfield. My head just hurts thinking about it.
Yeah, their moves have been kind of head-scratching in regards to their reliance on multiple backs in the past, right? They trade for Jordan Howard. And I likely think they made that trade with a compensatory pick in mind next year when Howard leaves as a free agent. But after they made the trade, it seemed like he would at least be the early down and goal line back for them. And then they make an unprecedented move for an analytically driven team. They trade up and select a running back in Miles Sanders in the second round. Now, he's been kind of injured throughout the offseason, and he's had a slow start to training camp as a result. But I do think we'll see him work his way into the mix for sure. And throughout the second half of the year, I think he's the guy you want in this backfield, just looking at what their moves are telling us.
Jordan Howard, he seems to be a punching bag in like fantasy football Twitter.
Yeah.
But he has been a top 18 producing fantasy back in each of the first 3 seasons. The Eagles have a top offense. They should see plenty of red zone opportunities. What do you see as your expectation for Jordan Howard right now?
It's really going to depend on the development of Sanders. If Sanders is so good that they can't take him off the field, then Howard's going to be rendered relatively useless here. But he's a smart runner, a very talented runner, like you said, top 18 in fantasy each of the last 3 years. And he's being drafted behind Miles Sanders right now. And understandably slow, given what I just said about Sanders' ability. But if Sanders doesn't get healthy, doesn't improve and secure his ball handling, then we could very easily see Howard lead this backfield in touches. And if that's the case, he's a massive value in fantasy.
Let's move on to the Skins. We know all about Darius Slay, last year's second-round pick, first-round talent, got hurt in preseason, tore his ACL, and it was just a very, very negative experience. Infections, multiple surgeries, comes back, the OTAs, pulls his hamstring, but it looks like he's full speed ahead going into camp right now.
It looks like it. He did not start the camp on the PUP list, so he is practicing. Reporters said that they are going to take it slow with him just because of all the time off that he has had. But, with his ADP right now, it started early in the summer, 6th, 7th round. Now it's dropped to the 8th round, 9th, 10th round. And when you get a guy with his kind of talent, I think in those rounds, that's where you're looking for upside, right? And I know that Trent Williams is not reporting, staying away, trying to get traded, new contract, whatever it may be, and he could very easily not be on the field week 1, and that would negatively impact this offense in a big way. But when you're taking home run shots in round 9 and 10, it's hard to find a guy with much better talent.
And Jay Gruden, despite his reputation, he does like to run the football, maybe not in the most efficient manners, but Adrian Peterson last year had 251 attempts, ran for over 1,000 yards. Do you see any, let's say, lingering effects from last year's performance, or do you think that the Skins are going to go into it with, hey, AP, like you did well last year, but you're here to be the backup?
Well, he didn't take that very well in New Orleans, so I'm not sure he'll take that very well here in Washington either. So I think he will complicate things, whether it be with his ability on the field or his antics off the field. But I just think that in the end, talent wins out. And in this backfield, at his age compared to AP's age, you have to go Geis.
What about Chris Thompson? I mean, despite injuries, he does average 5 targets a game the last 2 years. He's extremely explosive, produces in the passing game. Do you see him as worth a late round flyer?
Yeah, especially in PPR leagues. If this team is going to be as bad as we think they are, then Thompson should have a decent amount of garbage work in the second half of games. And that should mean a ton of receptions. As long as he can stay on the field, he's produced the last couple of years. So that caps Geis's full upside. If Thompson goes down, then the ceiling is massive for Geis. But as long as Thompson's still around, he's going to have that role in the passing game.
Let's move on to the Cardinals out in the NFC West. Not too much to discuss. It's all DJ, 3 down back. Can be split out wide. We'll get red zone looks. Chase Edmonds, is he just the handcuff here?
He doesn't think he is. He said in an interview the other day that, I'll have a role in this offense, but let's be serious. Look at DJ's contract. Look at his ability. Look at this offense. It's DJ's show. He's worth the top 5 pick where he's being drafted in fantasy now. And Edmonds is, though, one of the higher upside, true handcuff backup running backs that you can get late in drafts.
Do you expect Kliff Kingsbury's offense to reflect more like Bruce Arians was a couple of years ago and how they used DJ?
Yeah, if we're comparing it to last year and Mike McCoy and Byron Leftwich's usage, then yeah, it's going to be much closer to Arians than last year's debacle.
So the 49ers, they have sort of a 3-headed monster in the backfield. I like all 3 guys from a talent standpoint. We know what happened to Jerick McKinnon last year, tearing his ACL in training camp. He missed all of last year. Matt Breida, as you like to say, kept on regrowing limbs every week and showing up on Sundays, whether he was like doubtful the day before. But they just recently brought on Tevin Coleman, who seems to be like the only one going into the season 100% healthy. What's your outlook? We know we love Kyle Shanahan running backs, but is it just too much noise right now?
It's a lot of noise, but there's a lot of fantasy potential here. Despite McKinnon going down, despite Breida's nagging injuries, despite having to start Jeffrey Wilson at times, this team still ran for the 3rd most yards in the league, despite having a losing record. Shanahan's scheme is that good. There's plenty of opportunity for 2 running backs here to be fantasy relevant. And Coleman is being drafted first for good reason. Like you said, he is the healthiest. He has familiarity with Shanahan's scheme. They went out and got him this year. McKinnon's ACL recovery is still lingering a bit. He's not practicing to start camp, but I know most reporters expect him to be back soon. Breida is the guy that intrigues me because he can be drafted so late. He was super productive last year. And if McKinnon's just can't get on the field, Breida could be that number 2 guy. and possibly even the number one guy if Coleman sticks to his role that he had in Atlanta, where Freeman is the early down guy and Coleman's kind of the change of pace. So lots of potential here. I don't mind any of the three, to be honest, but I do think my favorite is Breida.
The Rams and Todd Gurley, man. Just last year, consensus number one overall pick. The year before, epic season. And now his knee arthritis is really catching up to him. Last year, I think it was an injury he sustained earlier last year, but it just lingered on. And then towards the end, we saw that CJ Anderson really was getting equal workload, right? And that's in itself concerning. And going into this year, just a lot of doubt as far as where Todd Gurley's value will be. He's falling like late second. I've seen him go in like third rounds of drafts. Is this like an overreaction, or is there a lot of reason to be concerned?
I don't necessarily think it's an overreaction to his injury, because a lot of running backs, if you listen to NFL medical experts, a lot of running backs have arthritis in their knees. But the difference between those guys and Todd Gurley is that their teams didn't come out and flat out say that we're going to limit his workload. Like they've multiple times this offseason said that we're going to scale him back. I imagine he'll still be productive on a per touch basis, but they said they're going to scale him back. They said it's a medical reason. And then they go out, draft Darrell Henderson in the third round. They trade up to get him. And then in their post-draft press conference, which is the most honesty, that's the time of the year you'll have front offices and coaching staffs be the most honest about their plans for the upcoming season.
For some reason.
Yeah, I think they're just high off making the draft picks and going through that whole process, being in the war room together, excited about the season. I mean, these guys could not stop talking about Darrell Henderson. They said they envision him to be an Alvin Kamara type back, that they're going to use him like that. And if that's the case, one, he's my favorite fantasy running back to draft this year. But two, if he is that good, and Matt Waldman, who over at Football Guys does his big scouting reports every year, and a guy we like to lean on for our scouting reports for NFL preseason DFS, said Henderson's the best receiving back in this class. If all of this is true, then it's really hard for Gurley to hit any upside being drafted in the second round.
And it makes Henderson like a potential league winner. So do you feel as though Todd Gurley is still worth a like early third, late second round pick, or are you just avoiding him completely?
I guess it depends on the makeup of your team. If you can get him in the third, I think there's probably some upside there where, 12, 15 backs are off the board. But if you're taking him, sixth or seventh off the running back position, there's not much profit room for you there if you do draft him. So
let's talk about a backfield that loves to run the ball. The Seattle Seahawks. No team ran the football more than the Seahawks last year. In fact, 3 running backs totaled for 444 carries, which is insane.
Yeah, just how Pete Carroll and that staff wants it, right? But this is intriguing to me. Like we talked about with the 49ers having opportunity for 2 backs, I think the same can be said here with Seattle. Although the demise of their defense with Earl Thomas and Jerron Reed, and I do think they end up in more shootouts this year, and they won't approach that 444 running back carry mark despite what they truly want to do. But Carson is the guy here, despite Penny's draft stock last year. Penny just technically hasn't been as good of a back, and the reporters are reporting the same thing early in training camp. So this is going to be a 1-2 punch, and no guy is going to get 100% of the carries. But based on last year and the reports we're seeing so far, I think Carson is the guy you want.
Right now, Mike Davis no longer with them. That was 112 carries right there. So plenty of work, I think, for both guys to be productive, like you said. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I love talking about this backfield for some reason, mainly just because I think it's funny. The Peyton Barber, Ronald Jones duo. But hey, they got a head coach now, Bruce Arians, who does think, he doesn't really need a running back maybe. But is there anything to discuss here? Like Rojo, I heard he gained some weight, which usually isn't a good thing. But do you see any upside, anyone here that piques your interest?
Only if Jones flat out wins the job. and Arians says that he's our guy. Because if that's the case, he's made big improvements to his game, and he'll be worth drafting and putting in your DFS lineups. But gaining weight doesn't really solve what Ronald Jones' problem was. His is more technical, vision, making the right decisions, whereas Barber excels in that area. And many hashtag film watchers in the NFL, in the analyst community, agree that Barber is one of the highest rated backs when it comes to that vision and making the right decision in the hole and manipulating defenders. Jones, that is not his strength. So I think Barber's the guy who will win the job. And he's probably worth where he's being drafted just to help you in some flex weeks. But watch Jones, and if he does win the job, he's the guy you want.
I'd say I'm into the Barber sweepstakes year 2 here. I do think he's talented. He thrives with yards after contact, and despite like this offensive line struggles, he gets red zone work. So if this Tampa Bay offense continues to move the ball up and down the field, and Bruce Arians is a little more efficient and like effective with like the run scheme, I think there's just some upside here with where he's being drafted. Not a league winner by any means, but like you said, certainly an unsexy pick that can give you some value.
Yeah, and you're still going to need guys like that on your fantasy team. 9th through 11th rounds, certainly worth a shot there.
Darius Sanders is, I like to call him, I don't know if that's offensive, Christian McCaffrey. He leads the way for the Carolina Panthers. He is the real deal at this point, entering year number 3. I think we know what we have here, a very dynamic player. He's going top 3 in pretty much all fantasy drafts here. Do you see him to continue to improve his workload, or do you see maybe him taking a step back with volume?
Ron Rivera said they do want to scale back his workload a bit, but that's okay because there were some games last year where he legit played 100% of the snaps. So even if he drops down to 90, 95%, he still has top 3 upside. And given the fact that most of his usage comes in the passing game, which we know is more valuable for fantasy, I'm totally okay with the trade-off of a little less volume to hopefully preserve him for the full season.
Yeah, I love me some McCaffrey and looking forward to getting him in a few of my teams this year. So the Saints, we know who Alvin Kamara is, one of the most talented backs in the league. Great as a receiver. You can line him out wide. Sean Payton knows how to use him, and he's also extremely effective in the red zone. And now that Mark Ingram is gone, that's about 13 touches a game, and Latavius Murray is in, who's also a very effective red zone runner. How do you see this playing out? Do you see Latavius filling in for that Mark Ingram role? Do you see it scaling back and maybe more on the red zone side of things? What's your gut?
Well, I was watching the NFL Network training camp live the other day, and somehow throughout a 20-minute Alvin Kamara Saints running game expectations segment, they didn't mention Latavius Murray until the 19-minute mark. Somehow they just assumed that Kamara was going to assume every touch that Ingram left. And then only recently, at the very end, did the producer in their earpiece say, "Hey guys, remember they signed Latavius Murray too?" And then they start bringing him up. So I don't know I wouldn't listen to them. I do think it's a 1-for-1 swap. Murray comes in; he's an excellent goal line runner. I think he's top 5 in the league since he came in goal line attempts, being within the 5-yard line. So I don't think we see a huge bump with Kamara. I really do think Latavius slides into Ingram's role. Kamara stays the same, and that's about it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree, man. Sean Payton is not some old school coach. He is a progressive, keeps up with the times, understands that someone like Alvin Kamara, you need him all over the field, and you can't just run him down. He's not the biggest, most physically imposing running back, and there's a reason they brought in Latavius Murray. Even if it's not 13 touches a game, there's still so much value for a goal line back and one of the more effective goal line runners in the league. So I like Latavius Murray where he's getting drafted. Alvin Kamara is well worth a top 4 pick, especially in PPR leagues. And I like this backfield a lot.
Not to mention, as Breeze is getting older, likely a little more run heavy, just more opportunities for both of those guys.
I'll let you run with this one, the Atlanta Falcons backfield. I know you have a few opinions on this.
Yeah, I'm originally of the belief that this offense has room for 2 fantasy relevant running backs. The Atlanta Falcons just had a ton of injuries on both sides of the ball last year, but they've massively upgraded their offensive line this year They play 13 of their 16 regular season games in domes, which pans out pretty well for their offense. They get Deion Jones, Keanu Neal back. Should be more opportunities overall for these running backs. Now, Devonta Freeman's back, supposedly fully healthy, looks great in camp, but there is no Tevin Coleman, like we said earlier. Ito Smith didn't impress much last year. Hasn't impressed much in camp this year. They drafted Quadra Allison in the 5th round this year, a bigger type back. And Brian Hill, we can't forget about him, who also rushed for 100 yards late in the season when he did get the start. So I think that's a training camp battle to watch to see if any of these guys can become a true complement to Devonta Freeman.
And let's say someone does step up. Do you still see Devonta Freeman as a fantasy asset still taking a step forward, given Tevin Coleman and his dynamic skill set's no longer there?
I think you have to like him, just where he's being drafted, mid-third round-ish in season-long drafts. And if this offense does do what we think it does, and if the reports of his full health are in fact true, then you have to like his potential for this year.
I feel you there, man. You just look at this Atlanta Falcons offense, and we talked about them being a interesting Super Bowl bet to monitor, given the lower expectations. But between Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, they have weapons. So Devonta Freeman, he's not going to see 8-man boxes. They're going to be able to get him out in space. And I think, like you said, he's a lot of value with where he's being drafted.
Yeah,
so,
and Julio said he's going for 3,000 yards this year, so we'll see how much room that leaves for these other guys on offense.
Yeah, bring that on. I love me some Julio Jones, 3,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. So let's start with some breaking news regarding the NFC North. Theo Riddick was just released, and we talked about this a couple days back, where we knew that could have happened. Didn't expect it to happen right here, but what does this do for Kerryon Johnson's upside in the passing game?
Just massive, massive, massive upside. Riddick was basically guaranteed third downs if he was still on the team. Kerryon, he was great in the passing game in his rookie year last year before going down. The running back coach says there is no limit on the amount of touches they're willing to give to Kerryon. And, I mean, he has 60, 70, potentially 80 catch upside in this offense. I really do think this is a massive boost to his outlook. The really one concern that we have to look out for is C.J. Anderson. Will he get goal line work? Will this be a 60-40 running back split? All very possible with Matt Patricia running the team.
Oh, boy, don't get me started with Matt Patricia and the Lions. But there's no doubt Kerryon Johnson has top talent and just that ability to be on the field third down, and when they're playing catch up, if he can get more receptions, where's he getting drafted right now?
He's early mid-third, and sometimes you can get him a little bit later, but I mean, this news could bump him up into the second round, and I don't think that's wrong at all.
No, I think it definitely will here. So if you're drafting in the next few days before people kind of adjust to it, something to keep an eye out is Kerryon Johnson's value. So the Packers, we are all big Aaron Jones fans, and we know Mike McCarthy wasn't. He loved him some Jamal Williams. So new head coach, Aaron Jones, is he finally going to be free of shackles?
He's being drafted like he's going to be freed. Although new coach Matt LaFleur did come out and say that, we're not just going to use one guy. We'll see how that unfolds once the games start. But I do think Jones is the guy you want here. He should get a majority of the workload. He looked great when he did it last year. Mm-hmm. Jamal Williams hasn't produced up to my, for some reason, lofty expectations. And then they draft Dexter Williams, who is kind of an intriguing 6th-round guy I think you want to keep an eye on if this does, in fact, turn into a committee or Jones goes down. But I know you like Jones as well, right?
Yeah, I don't want to harp on yards per carry, but anytime someone gets over 130 attempts and averages 5.5 yards per carry, they have to be pretty decent, right? And he's very effective in the pass game, especially after October where they started to feature him. I think he had a stretch of 7 straight games with double-digit touches, and also getting 4, 5, 6 targets in the passing game. So coming from Aaron Rodgers, that's high upside. And right now, as far as I'm concerned, he is one of the guys to own in kind of those early mid rounds for running backs. We'll see if the Packers use him as they should, but there's no denying the talent. When you see something and you're like, okay, this guy's really good, that's how I feel about Aaron Jones. And now it comes down to how the coaching staff utilizes him. I'd like to believe, despite the words of LaFleur, like he really knows what he has on his roster.
I think so too.
Preseason should be a busy time for rookie David Montgomery of the Bears, who is apparently going to get a strong workload.
Yeah, that's like the last thing you want to hear, right? If you're drafting a running back.
Like, damn it.
Yes. Let's give him more opportunities to get injured in meaningless games. And I understand, like, you want to see what you have out of your rookie, but running back is the one position where they can pretty much jump in and seamlessly transition from the college game. But you know, they traded for Mike Davis early in the offseason, and they made it sound like he was their guy. He can do everything. He can play in the pass game, good in between the tackles, runner. And then despite only having a handful of picks in this year's draft, they trade up and take David Montgomery out of Iowa State. And Montgomery's a beast at forcing missed tackles, which is normally a pretty good indicator of success in the NFL. And so I think because of that, because of their move in the draft, despite having not a ton of picks, I do think Montgomery ends up being the guy here. And as we talked about with Jordan Howard earlier, who had 250 some carries, that upside's here, plus more work in the passing game potentially for Montgomery.
And we know who Tariq Owen is, extremely like effective gadget player, and they can line him up wide. He's probably not going to see more than 100 carries, right? Like right around that mark.
Yeah, he literally said in an interview yesterday that my role is not changed. I know what my role is. It won't change at all. So I don't think, I mean, maybe he's like pulling the greatest finesse on us ever, and he ends up getting 300 touches, but I think he's being pretty honest here.
He's like a more efficiently utilized Chris Thompson in my eyes. And the Bears know what he means to that offense. They're not about to run him into the ground. So I think, yeah, David Montgomery is the guy to own as far as this Bears backfield. Let's wrap things up with the Minnesota Vikings. Dalvin Cook. This is no more Latavius Murray. He's going to be given the keys, and hopefully he can stay healthy.
Let's hope so. A lot of people are doubting Cook's ability to stay healthy. I got a question on Twitter, and this was about Leonard Fournette, but I think it can apply here too. Us as outsiders, we generally have no clue on how to distinguish whether a guy's body it truly is injury prone or whether or not he's just had a string of bad luck. Like if a dude pulls his hamstring like 7 straight years, then yeah, he's probably injury prone. But I mean, different injuries for Cook, ACL, hamstring, shoulder, like maybe his body is injury prone, but maybe he's just unlucky. We literally cannot tell the difference. So I'm not going to discount him for injury. Bringing in Gary Kubiak here to run this run game scheme. Big things I think are expected for Dalvin Cook. And I even think his backup, Alexander Mattison, has a good opportunity too.
Well, if you get Cook, you're going to have to handcuff him. Fair?
I normally don't like handcuffing, but I think this type of situation, especially where you can get Madison, like basically the last round of your draft, especially if you're in a casual league, then yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and obviously comes down to roster size and how much you can hoard, right? But no, I'm high on Dalvin Cook, man. He has the dynamic ability you look for. He had 40 catches last year in 9-10 games, and he can run the ball. So he's one of these explosive players that is going to be on a high-octane offense. They'll get the ball down the field with Thielen and Diggs, and he'll have opportunities to kind of go under the radar. So this is the type of player, if you get 16 games out of him, he very well could finish, as a top 6-7 running back.
At least, especially with his work in the passing game. And they've upgraded the offensive line a bit too. I mean, just the entire situation looks great for Dalvin Cook. If he stays healthy, he will 100% outproduce his ADP.
Well, here's the Dalvin Cook's health, man. He's a fun guy to watch. So that wraps it up for the NFC. We'll catch you on the flip side where we talk about the AFC backfields. Thanks for joining us. And be sure to follow us at Occupy Fantasy. Subscribe to our podcast if you like our content. And we'll see you soon.